"Wrong hood, old man!" The words were spit like a warning and a curse all at once, sharp, unprovoked, and loud enough to make the wind pause. The boy's teeth bared with each syllable, his breath sour with smoke, pupils dilated under the gray midday light. He stood just inches from the veteran's face, his hands curled into fists, shaking with something more than anger, desperation. Earl McKee didn't flinch. His grip remained steady on the wooden broom handle, even as another boot came down hard across it, snapping the lower end against the edge of the curb. Splinters scattered. The broken half clattered across the pavement. Two others circled behind him, arms folded, faces twisted in mockery. One mimed a salute. Another swiped the faded cap from Earl's head and tossed it into the street like trash. The fourth leaned against the wall with glazed eyes, chuckling without looking. Earl's hands moved slowly, one to his chest, steadying his coat, the other adjusting the cuff of his sleeve as if the cold air had somehow become more personal. The cap remained where it landed, untouched in the dirt, but his eyes, they never left the leader. He was surrounded. 4 young men, all jittery, twitching, reeking of gasoline and defeat. They had cornered him just outside the corner store, beneath the shade of a rusted awning. The sidewalk, empty moments ago, now pulsed with held breath. A mother across the road pulled her child behind her and closed her car door. The gang leader stepped forward again, mouth curled into a sneer. "You looking for a war story, sailor?" he hissed. "You're in the wrong war now." The final step closed the gap. His fist came up. Not yet a punch, but the threat of one, close enough to cast a shadow across Earl's jaw. And that's when it happened. A mechanical growl echoed from down the road. Tires groaned against asphalt. Gravel lifted from the shoulder. A full-size sheriff's truck, all steel, tan paint dulled by dust, screeched into the lot with a force that stole the air. The front bumper stopped inches from the edge of the curb. The gang froze. Not out of fear, but instinct. The kind that feels a shift in the air before it understands why. The driver's side door flung open. The sound of boots hit the pavement, deliberate, heavy, final. And still, Earl did not move. He did not speak. His cap was gone, his broom broken, but his spine remained straight, his shoulders square, his breath even. The badge on the sheriff's chest caught the sun just enough to gleam, but no one moved. Not yet. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, please subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. The sun was still stretching over the rooftops when Earl McKee began his walk. Gravel shifted under his boots as he made his way down the same cracked sidewalk he had tread every morning for the last 15 years. In his right hand, he carried an old push broom, bristles worn, handle smooth from calloused fingers. His left arm hung slightly behind, careful, deliberate. That side of his body hadn't moved quite the same since Okinawa. Earl Dusty McKee was 87 years old. He hadn't been called Dusty in decades, not since the Pacific Theater, where nicknames stuck better than wounds. Some folks in town didn't even know his real name. To them, he was just the old man who swept the lot in front of the corner store. Same time, every morning, like clockwork. Long after retirement, long after his wife passed, long after most folks would have stopped showing up for anything. The cap on his head was older than most of the town's teenagers. Navy blue, frayed at the brim, with a silver eagle pin dulled by years of sun and sweat. He never stepped outside without it. That cap had been to Saipan, to Tinian, to the bloody sand of Okinawa. Now it shaded his eyes from the rising heat of a small, forgotten town that hadn't seen change in a generation. The store wasn't his anymore. His son owned it now. Tall, quiet, good with numbers, less so with words. Earl never asked for a key, never went inside unless invited. But the porch out front was his domain. That patch of concrete, that hanging bird feeder, that row of wooden benches, all under his stewardship, and he took it seriously. A child on a bicycle passed, one wheel squeaking with each rotation. The boy lifted a hand. "Morning, Mr. McKee." Earl nodded once, short and slow. He didn't wave. The broom in his hand lowered, then resumed its motion. There was dignity in his silence, in the way he acknowledged the world, but didn't ask anything of it. The feeder rattled as he reached for it, the chain creaking on its old hook. His fingers trembled faintly as he unscrewed the top. Arthritis. Cold morning. He didn't complain. He never did. He poured a scoop of seed into the basin, letting the small grains scatter like memory into the wind. Finches always came first, then sparrows, sometimes a blue jay. They knew him, in the way birds know what's safe. Earl sat for a moment on the bench, hands resting over the broom handle, eyes fixed on the horizon. Not watching, remembering. Behind him, through the glass door of the store, his son counted coins at the register. A radio played low from within, muffled country twang echoing off old tile and dusty shelves. Neither of them spoke. They hadn't really in years, but there was no coldness in the silence, just age. Time having settled between them like dust on the porch rail. Down the street, past the edge of the gas station, a figure stood behind the window of the abandoned auto shop. Tall, hooded, arms folded. Earl saw him, didn't stare, didn't judge. He had seen worse, far worse, when faces were painted in camouflage and friends were missing half their bodies. His broom resumed its slow, steady arc across the sidewalk. Gravel brushed into piles, then into the gutter. The porch groaned faintly as he stepped forward. His limp was sharper today, but manageable. It always was. There were rules Earl had lived by for decades. Leave things cleaner than you found them. Never speak more than you need to. And always keep your word. He had told his wife, before she passed, that he would take care of the store, not the business, but the space. The porch, the morning light, the birds. And so, he did. A breeze stirred the dust along the curb. A plastic cup tumbled across the lot. Earl walked after it, broom tapping lightly against the pavement. He stopped, adjusted the cap on his head, and lowered the bristles to sweep it gently toward the trash bin beside the bench. The cup never made it. A soda can struck it mid-roll, sudden, deliberate. It clanged off the sidewalk and bounced into the gutter. Earl looked up. Across the street, the figures had multiplied. They hadn't been there minutes ago. Now there were 4. Young, hard-eyed, loud. One leaned against the hood of a stripped-down car, his foot tapping, a cigarette in hand. Another paced the edge of the street like a caged animal. They spoke in bursts, short, chaotic sentences peppered with laughter that didn't sound real. One of them pointed. Earl didn't turn away. He finished brushing the cup aside, uprighted the nearby trash bin, and walked back toward the feeder. The tension behind him followed, like a shadow that hadn't chosen a shape yet. He didn't need to know their names. He already knew their type. Twitchy, lost boys looking for something firm enough to punch, something steady enough to spit on. He'd seen them in boot camp once, before war carved the arrogance out. And he had seen them in alleyways during the long, cold years after discharge. The broom was upright again. His hands returned to the grip. Earl swept the last of the seed husks into a neat pile beside the doorframe. Inside the store, his son moved toward the coffee machine. No sign that he had seen the boys gathering. Then, one of them stepped off the curb. Earl didn't look up, but his sweeping slowed. The shape of the day had changed, and he felt it. The sound of rubber soles on asphalt was too casual to be a threat on its own. But Earl noticed the shift immediately. He didn't turn his head. He didn't have to. Years of service had trained his body to feel proximity long before sight confirmed it. The air grew tighter around him, the kind of pressure you feel when someone steps too close and doesn't mean well. The broom scraped over the concrete one more time before Earl set it gently against the porch railing. He straightened slowly, a palm resting against the old iron post for support. It let out a low creak beneath his weight. The feeder swung slightly in the rising breeze, scattering a few loose seeds into the cracks of the wood. A voice followed. "Hey, old man! Wrong hood!" The words came sharp, pitched high with the desperate confidence of someone who needed to be noticed. Laughter followed, brittle and forced, from somewhere behind the first figure. Another boot scuffed the gravel. The group was drifting closer now, like carrion birds drawn to a still shape. Earl turned then, not quickly, deliberately. His hand moved to the brim of his cap. He didn't adjust it. He just made sure it was still there. Across from him stood 4 young men, none older than 30, all dressed in layers that hadn't been washed in weeks. Hoods up, faces gaunt, teeth slightly yellowed or missing. The one in front, clearly the leader, was thin but wiry, with a jaw that ticked whenever he stopped moving. He had his thumbs hooked into the straps of his backpack like he was ready to lunge forward or peel away at any second. "You sweep in this place like you own it?" the leader barked, stepping closer. Earl didn't answer. His eyes narrowed slightly as he scanned the faces, not out of fear, but for information. He was looking for the one who wouldn't follow orders, the one most likely to swing first. "You hear me?" the young man said again, his voice rising, mocking now. "You deaf and dumb?" Earl exhaled once through his nose but said nothing. He reached down and picked up the overturned trash can, righting it with a practiced motion. His hand trembled slightly, but he didn't fumble. His movements were slow, but precise. Decades of discipline in his joints. Decades of pain behind the silence. Behind the group, one of the other men kicked a soda can toward the porch. It clattered against the steps, rolled beneath the bench. Another pulled a cigarette from behind his ear and lit it with a rusted lighter, the flame jumping high before settling into a weak burn. The third watched with darting eyes, nervy, shifting from foot to foot like he wasn't sure why they were even here. "You some kind of war hero or something?" the leader said, eyeing the cap on Earl's head. No response. He took another step forward. "Look at you, limping around like you matter. That's cute." Another laugh. This time, it was joined by one of the others, louder, less hesitant now. The scent of burned nicotine drifted into the air, mixing with motor oil and sun-warmed dust. Across the street, a curtain twitched behind the window of a second-story apartment, but no door opened. No one called out. Earl's son hadn't appeared either. Still inside, still unaware. Or maybe he was watching, waiting to see what his father would do, trusting the quiet strength that had gotten him this far. Or maybe he thought this was just another morning, just more dirt to sweep. The leader leaned in. His breath smelled of cheap energy drink and old adrenaline. His tone changed, quieter now. Not softer, just meaner. "You walk like you served, but you talk like you lost." The line was meant to sting. It didn't. Earl's mouth remained closed. His jaw clenched slightly. Not in anger, but in endurance, as if bracing for something far heavier than words. He bent again, slowly, and picked up the tin cup that had fallen near the feeder. His knees popped as he rose, but he didn't show strain. Then the leader stepped forward and slapped the cap from Earl's head. It landed softly on the porch, brim down, the eagle pin glinting once in the sunlight before turning still. Time froze for a moment. Earl's hand did not immediately reach for it. He stared at the boy in front of him. Not with shock, not with rage, but with something deeper. The kind of still, measured disappointment that only men who have seen real horror can carry in their eyes. The kind that says, "You don't know what you're doing," without ever saying a word. Another of the gang stepped forward and knocked over the bucket of birdseed. The small gray and yellow kernels scattered across the porch, bouncing down the wooden steps into the dirt. Some rolled toward the gutter. Some simply sat where they fell, like a ceremony undone, a morning ritual desecrated. From across the street, a woman in workout clothes paused as she walked her dog. Her phone in hand, earbuds in place, she looked up just long enough to register what was happening, and then looked away. A man at the gas pump shifted uncomfortably in his truck. The engine was already running. He hesitated, then pulled away, tires crunching slowly over gravel as he turned back onto the main road. Still, Earl didn't move. He reached down, not for the broom, not for the seed, but for his cap. His fingers brushed the rim with care, lifting it as if it were made of glass. He dusted off the eagle pin with the sleeve of his flannel, pausing only once to steady his balance against the railing. Then he placed it back on his head with solemn finality. His eyes rose again to meet the boys, and for a long, hanging second, nobody moved. The sound of wind picked up around them. The porch flag fluttered slightly on its pole. The finches had scattered. The air itself seemed to wait for something. But from down the road, beyond the rusted sign of the old diner, past the line of leaning mailboxes and dry fence posts, a rumble began to stir. A low engine, old, heavy, not in a hurry, but coming, and closer than anyone expected. The rumble grew, yet the gang didn't budge. The rumble belonged to something solid, something that had earned its authority, but this corner had its own gravity, its own momentum. The boy who'd knocked the cap off Earl's head now took a half step forward, pushing the air like he meant to collapse the world closer. Earl's posture did not ripple. He stood like a monument held upright by purpose, not posture. His hands remained at his sides, steady as before, but they were clenched inside his palms, toughened, unyielding. A fourth figure emerged from the car's shadow, leaning forward. His lips curved in disgust. He spat once. The saliva glided across the cracked concrete and curled toward Earl's boot. A man who had emptied blood from another man's body in a rice paddy did not flinch. One of the pushers reached for Earl's wrist, tight and on impulse. He meant to push him off the porch. Instead, his fingers found bone. Earl did not recoil. He did not startle. He only blinked, slow and measured, as if to say, "I didn't ask for this." The wrist slipped out, untouched. Then the leader clenched his fist and let it swing, so slow it could have missed. But it did not. It cracked against Earl's cheekbone. The impact was dull, a reminder that flesh could yield and bone would remember. Silence followed. Not emptiness. A full, heavy hush that dropped from the sky thicker than dust. Birds burst into flight from the feeder, wings rattling. Seeds drifted down, hitting wood and concrete and dirt with soft taps. Earl's eyes shut once. The world turned single frame. Then he exhaled, soundless, and opened them again. Blue eyes steady. Time resumed, slower now. He took a step down from the porch with barely a wince. His limp pronounced. The gang tensed, expecting retaliation, anger, noise. But Earl only straightened when he stood square on the cracked asphalt, dust coating his shoes. The leader squared up, smug now, laughed. The others laughed with him, emboldened by their act. One pulled out a flask and took a deep sip, sloshing the liquid against his cheek. A child who would have called him Mr. McKee earlier in a ribbon of morning light would not recognize the scene unfolding now. But Earl's son appeared then, pushing the glass door of the store halfway open. His face was pale with shock. He froze there, observing. The leader spat at Earl again, not fresh, tired, gone stale, made desperate. "You don't scare me," the boy muttered. "You're just old." Another shove to Earl's chest followed. Still nothing broke Earl's face. His voice emerged, quiet and direct. "If I were just old," he said, "you would already be in a hospital." He did not raise his voice. He did not step forward. But his tone carried the weight of sea storms and tears unspoken for decades. Behind the kids, the storefront's bell tinkled. The radio stopped. No one turned it back on. Another shift. The boy who had knocked the cap off now looked at his hands. One of them, Walker leaning, harboring rusted pasts, stepped forward then. A passerby with a tray of breadsticks halted in his tracks, curious now. A cashier at the deli across the street stared from the window without grabbing a phone. Earl stood where he had landed, limping, breathing, silent, but formidable. The boy's smile wavered. Then the rumble returned. The engine this time rang deeper, closer than the rude actors on the stage could predict. The truck did not rush. It did not screech. It arrived. An older model, matte tan, its sides coated in a thin skin of dust from the back roads, the kind of vehicle that didn't need a siren to command attention. The hood idled with the growl of something that had waited long enough. Every bolt sounded alive under pressure. The gang turned as one, more out of instinct than strategy. Their sneers didn't disappear, but they shifted. Pride gave way to recognition, and recognition to caution. The sheriff's seal was unmistakable on the door, dulled by age but never by authority. The engine cut off. Silence returned, complete and unbroken. The driver's door opened with a hard creak, like a barn gate pushed wide at dawn. A boot hit the gravel, then the other, measured, final. Sheriff Randy Barnes didn't wear sunglasses. He didn't need the illusion of distance. His eyes scanned the scene the way a man reads an open page. Fast, efficient, without missing a single word. He saw the broken broom, the scattered seed, Earl's right cheek, red and swelling. The boys, 4 of them, unsure of what to do with their hands now. He saw Earl's cap now resting properly on his head, pin straightened. Earl's shoulders were square. His breath was calm. The sheriff didn't ask what happened. He already knew. He walked forward, no rush. Each step slow and deliberate. His belt didn't sway. His badge didn't flash. His presence said enough. When he stopped at the edge of the porch, a slight breeze pushed the loose seed around his boots. The sound was faint but sharp, grit scraping grit. His voice, when it came, was as plain as a closing door. "That man swept blood off a ship deck at 16 years old. You think you scare him?" It wasn't loud, but it echoed. The tallest of the gang, the one who had laughed the most, took a half step back. Not much, just enough to mark the shift. The leader's jaw moved but said nothing. His tongue pressed into his cheek like he was working something sour between his teeth. His eyes darted between the sheriff and Earl. The posture of confidence was gone now. What remained was posture alone. The youngest boy reached for a cigarette and missed. His fingers twitched and dropped the pack. No one picked it up. The sheriff didn't pull his weapon. He didn't even touch his belt. He simply moved toward the porch and stooped, knees creaking beneath his weight. He picked up the broken piece of broom, held it like something meaningful, not just snapped wood. He carried it with both hands, walked it to Earl and held it out, as if to say, "This is yours, and that matters." Earl accepted it. He did not speak, but his eyes, sharp, blue, alive with something ancient, met Randy's for a moment that said everything. The gang was silent, not by force, but by reckoning. Sheriff Barnes turned. He stood now beside Earl, not in front, not behind, beside, shoulder to shoulder, 2 generations of service, neither needing to explain themselves. A car across the road turned off its engine. The driver stepped out and leaned on the hood, arms crossed, watching. Someone inside the corner store moved to the window. Another boot stepped onto the porch. Earl's son, mouth tight, jaw working. He didn't speak either, just stepped beside his father on the other side. A triangle of men now, not striking, not defending, just standing. The wind passed again, rattling the flag on the side post. The eagle pin shimmered. A single seed tumbled off the railing and hit the ground. The gang didn't move, not yet. For a long moment, the space between them all held. No words, no sudden movement, just the steady breath of the wind and the low groan of the flag straining on its metal bracket. The sheriff adjusted nothing. No holster, no voice, no footing. His presence alone shifted the balance of the air. Then he stepped forward once more, not toward the gang, toward the broom. It lay where it had fallen earlier, its bristles splayed like broken fingers, handle split where one of the boys had stomped it in half. The sheriff stooped again and with quiet care picked up both pieces. He held them as one would carry a folded flag, not for show, but for meaning. He turned, held them out toward Earl. The 2 men locked eyes again, and without words exchanged, Earl reached forward. His hands, Hands that had carried stretchers over coral-stained beaches closed around the broken broom like it was a ceremonial rifle. He didn't glance down. He didn't look to see if it could still be used. He simply accepted what was his, like he had 1,000 mornings before. The sheriff then turned, stood beside him again. Not a protective wall, not an enforcer, a witness, a brother in arms across time and duty. And that's when the power in the gang leader's stance began to bleed away. He looked from Earl to the sheriff, then to the man across the street, now joined by another bystander, a trucker with arms crossed and oil-stained hands. One of the boys behind him muttered something low, too soft to catch. The youngest looked ready to run. The leader tried to smirk, but the curve of his mouth failed to complete itself. His bravado was starting to tremble at the edges. Like a cheap coat in cold wind, it no longer fit right. From the store, the glass door clicked open. Earl's son stepped through, now holding a fresh cup of black coffee. He walked past the gang without even looking at them. He didn't say a word. He simply placed the cup on the porch railing beside his father and gave a small nod. Then, without waiting for acknowledgement, he returned inside. The message was clear. The world had shifted, and these boys no longer controlled the hour. The sheriff raised his chin slightly and glanced toward the leader, expression unreadable. "You done?" he asked. Quiet, sharp as flint. The leader didn't answer right away. His fingers fidgeted near the edge of his pocket, unsure whether to clench or retreat. He looked down, not in shame, not yet, but in search of something to say. Another of the gang began stepping backward, slowly, not cowardly, but changed. One step, then another. Then a sound broke the air, not dramatic, not loud. It was the slow clap of a porch chair being unfolded beside the door. An old man from across the street, one of the town's former postmasters, had taken a seat. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He simply watched, and with that, the leader of the gang turned to go. But Earl spoke before he could fully turn away. "Do you know how many boys I carried off beaches who never got to stand again?" His voice was dry, level, not angry, not preaching, just wait. You stand on your own two legs like it costs nothing. It didn't. The gang leader froze. He didn't look back, but he didn't move forward either. For the first time, he stood still, completely still, in the presence of something greater than himself. And that silence held longer than any shout could have lasted. The other three followed. They crossed the street again, slower than they'd come, shoulders less square, mouths shut. They disappeared into the skeletal shadow of the auto shop, swallowed by their own absence of power. Back on the porch, Earl stood with the broken broom in hand, the sheriff beside him. The sun had risen higher now, casting long lines down the concrete. A single bird returned to the feeder, hopping once, pecking at what was left of the seed. The breeze shifted again, bringing with it the faint scent of hot oil and pine. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The town had witnessed the stand, and from here, it would not forget. The dust had begun to settle. Across the empty lot, the sounds of everyday life tentatively returned. The low hum of a gas pump rebooting, the quiet creak of a screen door across the road, a flagpole rope tapping against its metal brace in slow rhythm. But on the porch, time remained still. Earl's grip around the broom had not slackened. His knuckles were pale with pressure, though his arms never shook. He stood tall, even with the limp, not by effort, but by discipline. The bruise was spreading across his cheekbone now, slow and gray-red like a tide rolling in at dusk. But his expression had not changed. It remained as it was when he first turned to face them, unblinking, unsurrendered. Beside him, Sheriff Barnes remained unmoving. His weight was evenly distributed between both boots, shoulders back but relaxed, as if he were ready to draw breath for a prayer or step forward for a fight, whichever came first. He said nothing. He glanced at Earl once, a brief flicker of the eyes, then looked straight ahead again. From inside the store, the door opened with a soft rustle of its hanging bell. This time, it was not Earl's son. It was a young woman, early 30s maybe, wearing a store apron and holding a worn dish towel in one hand. Her other hand cradled a small clay bowl filled with fresh seed. She stepped carefully onto the porch, placed the bowl on the railing near the feeder without a word, then offered a quiet nod before returning inside. The screen door clicked shut behind her like the punctuation of reverence. No one moved for a moment. Then, Earl leaned forward and gently emptied the rest of the old seed from his coat pocket into the bowl, grain by grain, as though each morsel mattered. The bird from earlier returned, perching on the edge. A second one joined. Smaller, feathers dusted with sunlight. They began to eat, and for a few seconds, it was only the sound of beaks tapping against ceramic, the rhythm of nature slowly reclaiming space. The sheriff looked to Earl again. Their eyes met, and stayed. There was no smile, no tear, no dramatic gesture, but something passed between them. A current, a confirmation, a story not retold but remembered. Theirs was not the camaraderie of casual friendship. It was the tether that runs between men who've seen what the others never will, whose lives were shaped by orders followed, by nights spent pacing hospital decks with blood between their fingers, by the sound of gunfire echoing across salt water. In that shared silence, the town adjusted itself, not because it was told to, because it had witnessed something that could not be explained, only respected. At the end of the lot, the man who had been leaning against his truck earlier crossed his arms tighter. His chin lifted. His gaze did not waver. Another figure emerged from the nearby diner, a cook in a white apron, who paused in the doorway, wiping his hands. Then he stepped down the steps and stood at the corner, facing the same direction as the others. They did not speak. They did not crowd. They simply aligned. The gang was long gone now, faded into the shadows of a broken building that had no porch, no birds, no reverence, just noise and walls. But here, in the silence that remained, was something rooted, something new. Earl took one slow breath through his nose, exhaled, then shifted his stance and gently rested the broken broom against the porch railing. He looked out toward the lot, not at anyone, not at anything specific. He didn't need to. The town had seen enough. The silence endured, not out of tension, but out of something heavier, reverence. It was the sort of stillness that only comes when people begin to understand they've missed something important, something that had always been there, quiet and steady, and they simply hadn't looked close enough. Then the stillness broke, not with a shout, not with a command, but with a boy's voice. He couldn't have been older than 16, maybe 17. He was holding a bottle of orange soda, thumb nervously working at the cap, unsure if he should be there at all. His hair was thick, his clothes rumpled from a day too long, but his eyes were pointed straight at Earl. "Is he really one of them?" the boy asked, nodding slightly toward the cap, the bird feeder, the man who hadn't said a word since the gang had left. Sheriff Barnes didn't look at the boy. He kept his eyes forward, his stance the same, but his voice came steady. World War II, United States Navy, Pacific Theater, medic on the USS Below Wood. He was 16 when he lied about his age to get in. The boy's hand stopped fidgeting. The bottle didn't open. He just stared. Another voice, this time from the man at the truck, followed. "What did he do over there?" Still without looking away, the sheriff answered. "Okinawa. He dragged a boy his own age through mortar fire with his bare hands. No gun, no flak vest. Just grit and a tourniquet made from his belt." The gas station clerk, the young woman with the apron, leaned in the doorway now, her lips parted slightly, eyes glistening, as if the dust in the air had suddenly stirred. Another man, the cook who had stepped from the diner earlier, spoke next. His voice was lower, as if afraid to disturb what was slowly building. "How come nobody knew?" Sheriff Barnes finally turned his head, just slightly, toward the crowd. "Because he never told anyone." The murmuring began then, soft and uncertain. Not gossip, realization. Earl stood just the same, hand resting on the porch railing, eyes on nothing in particular. His face didn't shift, but the weight of memory sat heavy behind those eyes, like a tide pressing gently against a seawall, steady and endless. The sheriff continued. He's come here every morning since his wife passed. Feeds the birds, sweeps the porch. He swept it the day she died. Never missed. And from inside the store, the bell above the counter gave a faint jingle. Earl's son emerged again, holding something this time. A folded piece of cloth. It was tan, lined with navy thread. Not a flag, not a uniform, just a ragged, hand-stitched pouch with initials sewn at the corner. E.M. He didn't walk fast. He didn't hold it up like a trophy. He approached the porch, stopping beside his father, and placed the cloth gently in Earl's palm. Then he stepped back again, hands behind his back, eyes down. Earl looked at the cloth for a long time. Then he opened it. Inside was a single patch, worn, faded, half-torn at the corner, the emblem of a Navy medical unit. The Red Cross nearly gone, but still visible. Tucked beside it was a small brass button, plain, dented, from a corpsman's uniform that hadn't been worn in 70 years. No one spoke now. No one moved. A teenage girl in the small crowd touched her chest, as if to still her heart. The soda bottle boy took a step forward and whispered to no one. He never said. And then the moment arrived. Quiet, full, unforced, when the entire space, the lot, the porch, the morning itself, seemed to bend around Earl. The old man didn't tell his story. He didn't need to. It had been told in the lines of his hands, in the limp in his walk, in the mornings he showed up, again and again, whether anyone watched or not. Now, they watched. Now, they knew. And now, no one could look away. The air was still warm, but the light had shifted. Long afternoon shadows beginning to stretch beneath the overhang of the porch. It wasn't yet evening, but something about the moment felt like twilight. Not of day, but of time. A turning point had arrived, and the town stood in its presence, hushed and altered. Sheriff Barnes moved first. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into the left breast pocket of his uniform. His fingers closed around something small. Not a weapon, not a citation, but a marker. A thick, black, permanent one, the kind used for highway signs and evidence labels. He uncapped it with one hand, walked toward the glass window beside the store's entrance, and began to write. Each stroke was purposeful. Not hurried, not showy. When he stepped back, the words stood clear across the pane, all in capital block letters. Reserved, Navy Vet, 7 to 9 a.m., disturbance, trespass. He clicked the cap back on and placed the marker in Earl's son's hand. There were no cheers, no whistles, but something rippled through the gathered faces, that subtle shift from observation to ownership, as if they'd been given permission to acknowledge what had always been true. From behind the counter, the young woman in the apron reappeared. She opened the door and leaned slightly out, voice steady, tone plain. "From now on," she said, "anyone here for the right reasons gets a free cup of coffee. Anyone here to mock him gets the sheriff." There was no need to laugh or nod. It was understood. A new protocol had been spoken, and it would be followed. A man in work boots stepped forward, pulling a card from his wallet. He didn't approach the porch, but he placed it gently on the first wooden step, the business card of a mechanic with veteran discounts printed on the back. Another, an older woman in a nurse's smock, left a small bunch of fresh flowers on the bench without a word. Even those who had said nothing, the boy with the soda, the girl beside him, the cook, the bystanders, they stayed, not in obligation, but in quiet agreement. Their presence was part of the change. Across the street, the gang's old corner, the side of the auto shop where they had once lounged, bragged, taunted, was now empty. But the emptiness didn't feel like peace. It felt like something that had been cast out. The weight of shame hung in its place, thin and visible like heat lines over a summer road. Earl remained still. He hadn't spoken since that single sentence, but he watched. And in his gaze there was no victory, no gloating, no vengeance, just observation. He had lived long enough to see hundreds come and go. Presidents, preachers, commanders. He had seen power rise and fall. This moment was not about justice in the loud sense. It was about memory restored. The sheriff gave him a single nod. It was not a signal to end anything, just a gesture of acknowledgement. He would remain as long as Earl needed, but nothing more needed to be said. Then, unexpectedly, from the edge of the porch, Earl's son bent slightly, retrieving the broken broom handle still resting against the wall. He looked at it for a moment, then without fanfare, placed it upright beside the bench. Not as trash, as tribute. The damage told a story now, not of loss, but of endurance. It would not be replaced. Not yet. It had earned its place in the scene. One final act unfolded. Quiet, easily missed. A young boy, maybe 10, stepped out from the crowd. He walked across the concrete with careful feet, reached into the pocket of his shorts, and placed a single quarter on the railing beside the bird feeder. He didn't say why. He didn't look around for approval. He just left it and walked away. Small things, all of them. But small things make legacies. 1 week later, the same porch glowed beneath the morning sun. Not brighter, not grander, but different. The air was clean, sharpened by a crisp breeze that tugged gently at the corners of Earl's jacket. The routine had not changed. Earl stood where he always did, broom in hand, feeding the birds. But something in the air had shifted, a subtle kind of permanence, as though the town had finally remembered something it should never have forgotten. The marker-written sign on the window had not been cleaned off. It remained, unweathered, unchallenged. No one had questioned it. No one had dared. The bench beside the door no longer sat empty. Each morning now, someone from the town took a turn filling that seat. Not to speak, not to ask, not to disturb, just to be there. One morning it was the man in boots from the truck. The next, it had been the nurse in the smock, her hands folded in her lap like a prayer. Today, it was the same boy who had left the quarter on the railing. He sat quietly, legs swinging, eyes following every move Earl made with that broom. The broken handle had not been replaced. It leaned against the wall beside the bench, just where it had rested the day the gang had gathered. But now it was adorned, not with decoration, not with ceremony, but with memory. A single ribbon of navy blue cloth was tied near its midpoint, fluttering softly in the breeze like a whisper. No one knew who placed it there. No one asked. Earl did not speak more than usual. He nodded where he always nodded, moved where he always moved. But there was less tension in his shoulders now, less hesitation in his step. When he swept, the bristles moved with their old rhythm again. Long strokes even, steady, as if the porch were being groomed for inspection. Sheriff Barnes drove by each morning around the same time. He never stopped unless there was cause, but he always looked, always nodded. That was enough. Earl's son had made one quiet change in the store. No banner, no announcement. Just a corner shelf, positioned beneath the store's clock. On it sat a small wooden box. Inside were 5 items: a navy cap, an old pocket watch, the faded corpsman patch, a single photo of a much younger Earl beside a ship, and the brass button from the stitched pouch. Above it, a placard. Some things you earn, others you carry. People noticed. Some paused longer than others. A few asked questions, but most simply looked and remembered. The gang never came back. Word spread, as it does in towns like this, not just of the sheriff, or the sign, or the broom handle, but of the man who had stood his ground with silence, of the community that had finally stood with him. That morning, as Earl turned to refill the feeder once again, he found something tucked beside the small bowl. A folded piece of notebook paper, corners creased, the ink slightly smudged. He opened it with calloused fingers, eyes scanning the uneven handwriting inside. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know what you'd done. I didn't know a man could still stand like that. Now I do. I'm sorry. It was unsigned. Earl looked at it for a long moment. Then quietly, he folded it again and placed it in his coat pocket, the inside one over the heart. Not to keep, to carry. He looked down at the birds, at the broom, at the porch, and then, with the smallest motion, he nodded to no one in particular. The bench would never be empty again. Not because it was reserved, but because it was remembered. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you're watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.